T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Kush's Corner here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, the coolest reptile network in the world. Alex Myers is back again, co-hosting with me tonight, and we are joined by Dr. Zac Loughman of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio fame to talk many things, but in particular, a topic that I know we all hold near and dear to us, and that is how to effectively bridge the gap between the academic and private sectors of the hobby. This is something that Alex and I have discussed for years and years on end, and we couldn't think of anyone better to discuss this topic than our guest tonight. But before we get into that, as always, USARK. So USARK is the organization that is fighting for our rights to keep our reptiles, to run our reptile businesses, and to live this lifestyle we all enjoy so much with the animals that mean as much to us as they do. So check out usark.org for all of the information you need to know about the organization. And if you are not already a USARK member, please look into becoming a member of the organization. You get notified when any new bills hit on either state, local, or federal levels. And as a community, we have strength in numbers. The more people that are behind the causes we are fighting for, the better. So usark.org for all of the information you need to know. All right. Thank you for everyone who is here already. Shout out to the live chat and the live viewers. Anyone who wants to throw any questions out in the chat tonight, feel free to do so. If you are here on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. A new podcast drops every single day of the week here on the channel from some of the best hosts in the game, talking about a wide variety of topics in the reptile industry. So if you are a fan of the reptile-related podcast content, you've come to the right place. We are on the streaming platforms as well, be it Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast from. A follow and a 5-star review on those platforms would be most appreciated. That said, let's bring Alex on and see how he's been. What's going on, Alex?
Doing good. Really excited for this episode, and I appreciate you reaching out to have me co-host with you.
Dude, it is my pleasure as always. So how have things been recently? I know you've got some exciting stuff going on this year. Yeah,
reptile-wise, things are progressing. Got 2 clutches of water dragon eggs on the ground so far for the year, on top of the clutch that hatched in February, but that was sort of an odd off cycle, but they're doing good. Actually really excited because like I just had my first person on my wait list get approved. They sent payment, so one of those little babies will be shipping out tomorrow, right at 8 weeks old, and hoping that just leads to more positivity and awareness of how awesome captive bred Chinese water dragons are, especially since you don't see them as much anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked about this on the show plenty of times about, important work like this with species that were at one point some of the most common imports around. And then all of a sudden something minor can happen, a CITES listing, an ESA or whatever it may be. And now they're nowhere. And some species get lost on the hobby like that. So, the work you're doing is going to ensure that the Chinese water dragon is not one of those species.
I hope so.
Yeah. But this is the first time for a while you've really had availability for water dragons. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I sort of, the last year I didn't breed them just because with me finishing school and then moving, securing work, it just wasn't feasible to advance with that battle. But then 2022 and 2023 were just sort of rough years with breeding. I had success. I got eggs, but I was trying out different things with my husbandry, and I won't lie, it's like I got eggs, like I got clutches, the whole 9 yards. The problem was just incubation failed. I had a vitamin overdose in my parents in 2022. The parents of the water dragons, not my biological parents, should clarify. And it just resulted in
3 bottles of vitamin C at once.
Yes, don't drink an entire thing of vitamin C. But yeah, it sucked because you get good eggs or what looks like good eggs, and then they never hatch, or you just get weak babies. But all that's out of the system. I've got new adults actually up and running, and thankfully the results are speaking for themselves. And I love hatching healthy baby water dragons.
There's nothing better than feeling that project come full circle to where it's settled in, it's producing, the animals are doing what they're supposed to, and feeling all that groundwork that you laid actually come to fruition. That's a nice one. That's definitely a good one. The real icing on the cake would be, and I don't know if she's going to cycle this year, but I do have a holdback from one of my 2020 pairings. Okay. So that would actually give me the chance, or it's just sort of like another box that I can check off to prove that I can not only, just reproduce different, individuals or get different individuals in the collection to reproduce, but to truly produce offspring from stock that I have produced prior. So I want to say there was an old episode of NPR where Keith McPeak said, you don't really have a species dialed in until you're breeding your own F2s. And I haven't been able to do that yet. So just something I'm slowly working towards, Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely the case. I'm in a similar position, but with males, with some of my scrub pythons where, I really hope by the end of this year, I can say that I have babies from a snake that I produced. So, it's so cool to think about where we started off with these projects, just high schoolers in Chicago, and kind of seeing where we're at now with them. I don't know. It's fun. Like it's just, it makes the enjoyment of it all that much more to me. Oh, definitely. Yeah. All right. So, tell us all about our guest tonight, Mr. Dr. Zac Loughman. Yeah, I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Loughman back at the 2023 International Herpetology Symposium that was held in Schaumburg, Illinois. And he gave a really, in my opinion, eye-opening talk on this concept of evidence-based herpetology. And so, in a sense, he was utilizing wild data, field studies, aspects that herpetologists use when studying reptiles and amphibians, and he was taking what these herpetologists found out and applying it to captive care. And it just sort of, for lack of a better term, opened up a portal in my brain, at least, and starting to go down a rabbit hole of actually reading scientific literature. And I mean, I was still in college at the time, but it really sort of taught me how to source information, how to utilize, at the time, my university database. And even like this past weekend, I was actually at my siblings' campus, and I went into their library and I just found a bunch of old reptile books and started writing down different papers that they cited that I'm hoping I'll be able to get access to one day to further my knowledge, and then ideally take that information and apply it to my keeping. So it was really impressive. The other thing, though, is Zac is one of the hosts for the Colubrid and Colubroid radio podcast on the Morelia Python Network. And it's a phenomenal podcast. I've said it on previous episodes, my full-time job, I'm a full-time snake breeder for a company. And so we specialize primarily in colubrid and dipsotted snakes. And a lot of those episodes that, Zac and used to be hosted by Matt Most as well. And now it's Clint Bartley of Metazotics. And the two of them just really complement the show. They share ideas. They bring on great guest speakers. And again, the idea of evidence-based herpetology, Zac features like a science update on that podcast where he's continuously sharing and reviewing different, scholarly articles or books. And on the topic of books too, for our video listeners, I have my wonderful 83 out of 100 signed copy of Zac's book, The Natural History and Captive Care of False Water Cobras, Barons, Racers, Musaranas, and other xenodontidine snakes. So the phenomenal book for anybody that's interested in some of the more obscure snakes. I mean, honestly, especially with false water cobras, if you don't know who Dr. Zac Loughman is and you're pursuing false water cobras, you're probably living under a rock, because now quite literally he has written the book on them, and a majority of phenomenal oddball snakes that are finally getting some time in the limelight, as it seems more people are starting to diverge into the oddball and what were once uncommon colubrid and dipsotted snakes. So with that being said, I think we should bring him on and have a really good discussion. I've got a lot of questions I got to throw at him. All right, let's do it. Good evening, Zac. How's it going?
It's going great. Thank you for that really cool introduction.
You're welcome.
So
Yeah.
for everyone who's listening who may not already be familiar with you, which probably will not be many people, give us a little bit of rundown of your life and times and herpetology and herpetoculture.
Well, there has not been a time in my life, and I'm 46, so I was an 80s kid, 90s kid, and graduated in the early 2000s. But there literally was not a time in my life where I wasn't an animal guy. And it was always, before I knew what zoology was, my focus was on that. I classic backstory started with the dinosaurs. My dad tells this story that I went to the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh with his high school class. He was a high school teacher, and they had a really boring tour guide, and I was running around like I was hopped up on drugs, just like spouting off genus names and talking about the different dinosaur hips and the sauropods and theropods. And I think it was like 5 or 6. So this has literally been my life. And when my parents, they built a house out in the country in northern West Virginia. And as soon as I got to live with woods behind me, the dinosaurs kind of went away because I could go up and find toads and garter snakes and box turtles and all that kind of jazz. But dinos didn't go away entirely. There's literally about 50 of them on top of these cages. So yeah. And in high school, I did science fairs, full-blown nerd. I learned all the Latin names for all the reptiles and amphibians in West Virginia and quizzed myself. Spent more time. I got that down, but I did horrible in math classes and things like that. So classic, either autism or ADHD, lock-in focus kind of deal that many of us have that do this kind of thing. And I had a mentor. I did this thing called the Regional Academic Institute. It was affectionately referred to as Nerd Camp. I spent 3 weeks with a herpetologist at West Liberty State College, and that man ended up being a huge mentor to me. I ended up going to West Liberty State College for my undergrad, and Mr. Gordon said, "Zoology lab is yours. Fill it with reptiles." And so that's where I cut my teeth in herpetoculture. The All Ohio Reptile Show, which is somewhat infamous. I remember, rest his soul, Brian Barczyk at that show before he did snake bites or anything. Yeah. Bob Ashley was always there with his shirts. Don Hamper. So, but I would go there and I would buy some ridiculous monitor lizard that I had no business owning and then bring it back to the campus and then keep it in the zoology lab and all kinds of snakes and everything. And herpetology was my deal. I went from, there, got my master's degree at Marshall in herps. And while I was at Marshall, though, everybody wanted to be a herpetologist. So that's when Steve Irwin was at his absolute peak. It was 2003, 2004.
Okay.
O'Shea was big. Corwin was big. And it was really hard to find a job in snakes. And my advisor said to me, rather infamously now, keep snakes as a hobby, find a group of animals nobody studies and be the guy, and you won't have to worry about getting a job or funding. And so that's where crayfish came into play because we were catching them in our salamander traps. And so I did this like diversion to crawdads, and then did that for my dissertation. So that's how I became Dr. Zack. Got asked to teach at West Liberty, came back. And then in 2016, actually 2015, we hired a professor who studied hellbenders and was my friend. And he mentioned this major called a zoo science major. And I was like, what the hell is that? And he's like, well, it's a major that prepares people to be curators in zoos. And I was like, well, that sounds cool. And we went full in on it. I was supposed to be the ecologist. He was supposed to be the zoo guy. And he was so good at being a zoo guy that he got a job as a director of a zoo 3 weeks before that was supposed to start. And so I was told, hey, you're going to do zoo sci. And if I was doing zoo sci, we were going to do herpetology. And that was my reintroduction back into herpetoculture, herpetology, and have not looked back since. I built a collection at the university that we use for our herpetoculture classes. It has, without babies, about 400 animals in it. And then I had to have my animals at home, hence this office that is now full of snakes, and a garage that's full of snakes, with some lizards that my son and I both keep. And yeah, that gets us to today. So I am thrilled to death that the opportunities I've had have, fall in my lap, but I also understood that when those opportunities arose, you only get them once, so you got to attack and put everything you got into them. And so that's been my strategy, and it's worked out so far.
That's quite the story, man. I mean, yeah, talk about a life full of reptiles and twists and turns and stuff like that. And yeah, I think kind of some of the rolling with the punches that you did is pretty admirable. I know for me, if I had those kinds of changes that I was faced with, I'm not sure how well I would do with it. So.
Well, I don't know. I've never. I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm bad at, but I try to be confident but not arrogant, because as soon as you're arrogant, you can't monopolize an opportunity. But if you know what you're good at and you're confident in your abilities, you also know what if you truly know what you're good at, you know what you're bad at. And so you just work on that and move forward. And that's been my strategy for my whole damn life. And it's gotten me to where I'm at. So.
And then at what point did the idea of being a podcaster in this realm cross?
That is a great question that I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. Good one. Well, one of the interesting things about being a professor who has to teach herpetoculture is it's really easy to teach herpetology, the science part of reptiles and amphibians. There's journals, there's textbooks, there's books, there's conferences, there's proceedings of conferences. So you can go to this kind of classic academic outlets and then gather up your material and prepare your lectures and teach your students and all that jazz. But with herpetoculture, when I got back in, I knew about things like the vivarium, which I read back in the day. I knew there were some, books that were available, but I was trying to just fuel my brain with as much information as I could about, brumation strategies, the different ways that we heat reptiles back in 2016. Like when I left herpetoculture was right around 2005, and heat lamps were what you used. I remember in 2016 saying to myself, what the hell is a herp stat? And now I've got like 10 of them in this house. So there was no real place for me to go that was your classic academic outlet to learn about that stuff. And so I was talking to my students. I spend a lot of time in 15-passenger vans doing field work, which means there's a lot of driving and you just talk about random stuff. And I just asked my students, my crayfish students actually, like, is there some place I can go other than YouTube and learn this stuff? And they were like, podcasts. And just to age myself, I was like, what the hell's a podcast? And then holy hell, my world exploded because I found NPR and I learned so much about freaking carpet pythons. I had carpet pythons. I like carpet pythons, but I was trying to pull out different heating methods. I learned how to cycle pythons, and the same material I teach in my herpetoculture class came straight out of the breeding episodes of NPR. That's where I got that information. And then they would talk about the Blue Bible. And I was like, what the hell's the Blue Bible? And then I thought, oh, that's Ross. And so then I would buy Ross. So podcasts were a somewhat invaluable way for me to gather data and information to then teach my students. And I also realized that there's a lot of 16 to 22-year-old reptile nerds that are always consuming podcasts. And who, as a college professor, am I supposed to recruit? 16 to 18-year-old reptile people. And so it became very clear to me that it might be lucrative for West Liberty if I did a podcast. But I went on a couple. I like the format. It's fun. It's easy. In a way, there's a teaching element to it that I absolutely love. And I was driving around and just there was not a colubrid podcast. And that's what I liked. And I love NPR. The format that Eric and Owen came up with for interviewing a guest and the whole, pick a species, go with it. I really like that. And I just wanted that for colubrids. And so when Eric decided to make the NPR network and he was feverishly adding shows, I thought, why don't we do a colubrid NPR? And so I called him. I'd been on their show once, and it did pretty well for them. And I basically said, I want to do exactly what you were doing, just colubrids. And oh, by the way, there's like 30, 40 python species. If we add the word colubroid there, we only have like 2,800 species of snake. So it just opens up orders of magnitude what we can discuss. And so it was for recruiting students, and it was for me also to learn. Like, I get to bring on guests that are interested in snakes I'm interested in, and I get to talk to them about it and kill multiple birds with one stone. So it was just a very logical thing, I think, for me to do. And a lot of academics, they run away from podcasts, but there's also quite a few academics that are my age and younger that understand there's a tremendous utility in this platform for
sure,
for educating people, for getting quality students to come your way, and to get the word out about your university. And I've been able to do all of those. I have grad students right now that were listeners to the show, and then they reached out, and now they're in my lab. So there you go. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's why.
I mean, that's a great reason to do a podcast. I mean, if I was 15, 16 when you guys started the show, I might have taken that route. That would have been very enticing, because especially back in the mid 2010s, being like a high school student interested in reptiles, you look around at what your potential career paths are, the universities you can go to. And at the time, it was kind of a bleak outlook, at least the information that I found. And, eventually led to me being like, I think I'll pursue other means of education and just try to self-educate on reptiles. I mean, how would you say and Alex probably speak on this too, since he went the more academic route, how would you say the landscape, as far as that goes, has developed over the last decade or so, or maybe even extrapolate further than that?
So if you want to go into herpetology, there's kind of this classic idea that to be a herpetologist, you have to, a lot of people think you got to go to college and then get your PhD and then go to a university and become a professor of herpetology. And even though I am that, there are a bunch of other ways to become a herpetologist that do not involve that very, linear, long pathway to the job. A lot of people can, agencies for all the different states at the state level, they usually have non-game biologists or zoologists, and many times there's several of those positions. There's a herpetological slant to it, and you have to manage the turtles or the snakes of a state or a region. There are U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service jobs that involve, basically doing threatened and endangered species work, and you can have a herpetological focus doing that. You can obviously go the zoo route. The zoo route, I don't think it gets enough love by academics, but now that I'm in zoo sci, knowing everything that I know, if I could talk to 18-year-old Zack and be like, this is what you're going to do, I would have totally gone the zoo route, tried to become a curator for a herpetological department, because I've met these people and they're like, yeah, I just got back from Vietnam. I'm like, oh, well, how long were you there? Oh, 3 weeks. I was figuring out what the habitat looks like for this box turtle, so that's cool. The problem with the zoo route is payment. So to get paid, you have to go to that kind of middle management part, which is the curator element. So that's why I would have tried to go, to get there, if you know what I'm saying. And when you're the curator, you get to make the decisions as to what direction the collection's going in. You get to make the research decisions. So that would probably have been what I would have aspired to do. Or another job that's in the zoo world that, kind of respects the degrees a lot more than academia is there's conservation biologists that oftentimes are working for zoos. And if you're part of the conservation center, you're probably going to be doing some kind of field work at some point in time. And because of the graduate degree, they oftentimes respect that. So, and then every zoo is different. Some zoos, like Riley pointed out, you are barely above or at minimum wage. And other zoos, if the zoo has a union, whether you like unions or not, they have a tendency to fight for your salary, and you can do pretty well there. So, but that's what I would have done. For sure. Absolutely, unequivocally. I don't know if or done what I'm doing right now, which is be a professor.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it seems like it worked out no matter.
Yeah, it totally did. I'm very happy with my job.
Yeah.
So,
well, Alex, I'll throw this one over to you now.
Yeah, I mean, I can only relate just from a bachelor degree standpoint, but then that's what led me to my job as a curator for this facility. And that's literally my job, curator of reptiles, so breeding, shipping, animal sales, just a little bit of everything. And yeah, I mean, it was great. I got the experience and I got the networking, and then I got the job. And now, for the most part, I call the shots, care for the animals, and make more snakes, for lack of a better term. And it's very enjoyable, especially, again, from an experience standpoint, just having moved out of state. Stephen, as you know, we grew up in Illinois. Like, I get to work with species that we weren't able to legally possess in Illinois, such as the beloved false water cobras. And, thanks to Zach's book and listening to the multiple episodes of CCR, that made that sort of, childhood dream of mine to oversee the captive propagation process happen. As far as, I'd have to agree with Riley. The pay, I definitely get that complaint sometimes from like zookeeping staff. And so unfortunately, that's just where I don't have any say in that, even though it's middle management. At the end of the day, the CEOs are the ones that oversee that. It's just out of my control. But, I try to just remind myself, at least as a person, that, Stephen, as you know, when we were 14, I was volunteering at the Wildlife Discovery Center. And I wasn't being paid. I just wanted to clean snakes. So, the reality is if you're doing that when you're a quote unquote adult, it's a process. I was, I guess you could say, a zookeeper younger instead of, partying in high school. And then I went to college, I got the class work. And that's why I'm a curator at this lovely ripe age of 24. Whether or not, I feel like I've only been doing this now for a solid year, just over that. So my experience overall is quite limited. It's been fun, to say the least. Like I said, maybe it makes me sound selfish, but I like working with the snakes. They're, snakes have one goal: to make more snakes and to think that you're bringing them food. So they're quite predictable, usually. A couple close calls. But overall, I think as far as like other job opportunities that are sometimes worth pursuing, I've had some people reach out to me that are like in the DNR, and that was possibly a path I had looked into. Believe it or not, like there's definitely demand for, at least in the realm of conservation, which surprised me, a lot of conservation law enforcement units wanting people who know their reptiles and amphibians. And the reason, this has been brought up to me multiple times, especially from contacts of mine in the DNR, is that like this summer, for instance, in the state, we had a hoarding situation where the police had to raid and confiscate animals. And quite literally, their conservation law officer couldn't identify any of the exotic species. He had no idea what a ball python was, for lack of a better term, or probably knew what a ball python was. But identifying yellow anacondas, drummerol's boas, black-headed pythons, these were not known to those people. And so, say if I was in that position, having the experience with herpeticulture, but also knowing state laws and knowing native species, that might have been something that you can go into. And from what I understand, conservation law officers, that's pretty much being a policeman. So I think, they get a pension and everything even after they're done. So, not that everything's about money, but you're still sort of tying in reptiles to that job while also enforcing. Well, again, it's, and Zach will probably, we're going to want to pick your brain on this. There's definitely some tension there, especially like with what's happened in Florida. And, some reptile keepers love the DNR. Some people really don't. And I think I've always sort of been in this awkward situation where I know people on both sides and I try to shake hands with both, because I love breeding bull snakes at work, but I also love seeing land set aside so our native bull snakes can do their thing in the wild so I can see them, you know?
Yep.
And some people want to collect them and some people don't want them to be collected. And I won't lie. I mean, I'm personally of the opinion that there's definitely plenty of them in the hobby, and I just want to keep seeing them out in the wild. So, you know, I said, Zach, we'll definitely pick your brain on that a bit more, but I have a bad habit of just rambling and going off the topic. So in short, I'd say with my limited experience, you know, post my my bachelor's, you know, it's been rewarding, but it definitely seems like it's a mix of experience and trying to have a clear-cut view of, you know, like what you said, Zach, what you want to do. You know, like you went the professor route, you look back, you're like, man, I really would have liked to be a curator too. So like it's having that goal in mind. And I think some of that just comes down to like, I had professors that told me, here's the jobs that you'll likely be able to do. What do you want to do? What do you enjoy doing? Like you said too, Zach, I knew what I'm good at. I'm good at putting two snakes together, trying to read papers on something and just making them make more snakes. I don't know if I'd be qualified to walk around in the sun for 12 hours doing field work. My field work courses definitely taught me that I am not the most outdoors person.
Working Norway or Sweden or something like that.
Yeah. Sun, not good. But yeah, that's, I guess that's my 2 cents on it.
That brings up a question for me. Based on the podcast, do you have any students who come your way who were familiarized with you through the podcast that have aspirations of pursuing a career in private herpetoculture based on hearing Clint or Matt or some of your guests who you know are more heavily involved in that?
Yeah. The degree of pursuit of the private sector herpetoculture, I don't know what. There's kind of a natural evolution for the students that come to West Liberty.
Okay.
A lot of them come in because they love taking care of reptiles, and then they get to take care of reptiles, and they're like, holy hell, I'm in college taking care of reptiles. And then because I'm a field biologist, field work is omnipresent. We have it's been going on since 2016. We study 2 aquatic snakes that are literally less than a mile from our science building. It's referred to as the Snake Project, but we study queen snakes and common water snakes. And so all the kids that come in to do herpetoculture, I kind of do everything shy of direct them to the stream and say, go out with the upperclassmen and work on this project.
Yeah.
And what invariably happens is 99% of them end up finding out they like both. And so we kind of direct them to either doing the zoo side of things, herpetoculture, private, herpetoculture, or herpetology, field work. And I would say that the vast majority of students end up going the herpetology route and then still stay in herpetoculture as not a hobby, but they definitely are like in it to win it.
Sure.
But we have a couple students that herpetoculture is their jam. That's what they're there for. That's what they want to do. And many of them are going to stick around, get their master's degree. And like I said, they're shooting for that kind of curator gig at the zoo. But I do have a handful of them at this point in the game. I'm pretty sure they are aspiring to do, something similar to what Clint does, where they're going to open a reptile shop or they're going to go breed snakes for a living. Like, yeah, I definitely have some of those.
It's so cool that there's now an avenue within academia to pursue that would prepare you for a career as a herpetoculturist. Like that. Yeah. That did not exist for me back when I was around that time. So that it's so cool now that, the teenagers of today can be directed to programs like yours and be set up for, for success in that way. To me, that's so groundbreaking. The
thing that's kind of crazy is, and I've tried to get one student to do this and he was like, I don't want to do that. And Clint has influenced me more than you'll ever know when it comes to the business side of things. And I've just basically told, the handful of students that want to do that, like, you're going to major in zoo sci and you're going to minor in business because you need to understand business. Because if you're going to go into this breeding snakes thing, my opinion is there is nothing wrong with that. And as Riley pointed out, it can be very lucrative. If you can, anybody can breed snakes.
You can do it well,
once you learn how to do it. Not everyone can manage a checkbook. So being able to like account for overhead, account for personnel, account for, those unexpected expenses, be able to do your taxes, be able to do the marketing, all of that part is every bit as important as taking my herpetology class.
Sure.
So that's what's kind of unique, is that those opportunities now exist at that. I'm sure they exist at other places. I know they exist at West Lib because I get along with the dean of business really well.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's interesting.
And that was my thought process too, which I didn't finish college. I had an opportunity to leave kind of shortly after entering, but yeah, I went the business route for that exact reason. Like I've made enough connections. I know people to where I probably can figure out what I need to, at least to a certain degree. And obviously when it comes to field biology, et cetera, I'm not going to get any of that, but to do something in the reptile industry from that, and then learn business from an academic standpoint. But if I could have done both simultaneously, I don't think I would have left. So
that's true.
That's awesome. Another thing that kind of came up briefly earlier, I want to touch back on is the topic of more reptile people, so to speak, getting into the government in one way or another, be that DNR jobs, conservation officers, et cetera. Do you see a movement towards that? And what do you think the benefits or the drawbacks would be of more herp people, so to speak, getting involved in government?
I think people with a herpetoculture background working for state agencies, I think let me back this up. They absolutely have to have a science-based herpetology background.
Sure.
Because your job, if you were the state herpetologist, is to gather data on the animals that are within your state's boundaries, and then run them through this thing called the NatureServe rank calculator that then generates these things we call S ranks. So whenever we say, bull snakes are I don't know if they are, but are endangered in Illinois in the Kankakee region. Sure. What that really means is that bull snakes are ranked as an S1 species, which is state endangered. Okay. And so to do that, you have to understand metapopulation biology, ecology, species delimitation. You got to understand zoogeography, like all these academic pursuits, right? But the other thing that biologist is doing is they're almost certainly going to be giving some insight on the regulations for keeping reptiles.
Right.
And when you just have that academic background and you don't have the, practical, pragmatic herpetoculture background, I think it can lead to overreach. And I think it can lead to accepting stereotypes that may not be true, because I know several state biologists that are keepers, and I know their perspective on keeping is very different than several state biologists I know that aren't keepers, that just kind of look at this as a poacher-driven exercise and we should protect everything and not let anybody have anything.
Sure.
So that perspective that comes from doing this and doing it the right way and seeing the right side of herpetoculture, I think it's nothing but good. And so that's where ideally having people at the state level that have kept and understand the importance of this. I mean, I tell everybody, I don't know how many biologists became biologists because they kept a crested gecko in their bedroom, or they had a corn snake, or they had a California king snake. It's a gateway drug. And if you limit that, you're literally taking away life experiences from young people that then lead to future conservation biologists. And I think we need to kind of take that into consideration before we do things like you can't keep corn snakes, which to me is just like, how the hell can you not keep a freaking corn snake? You know what I mean? Plus, how many of us are going out to get a freaking wild caught corn snake? Nobody does that.
No. It's infinitely harder than going to the pet store.
Yes. And you're also going to have an animal that could be nippy and bitey, and it's a problem, and it's going to die young. And that's another thing I think that's a problem with a lot of these state biologists, is they don't understand where the reptiles are coming from. I think they literally think that these animals are being plucked out of the wild. I don't think they understand that captive breeding and herpetoculture is all about maintaining a captive population, because we actually, as herpetoculturalists, want captive born animals. Like, so
how
you
could
got to get.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. That's fine.
So how could somebody in a legislative position not be aware of the multi-billion-dollar industry connected to the thing they're regulating?
I honestly don't think they truly understand the magnitude of it.
Yeah.
I worked with, and this was a positive experience, I worked with the state of West Virginia when they were doing their regulations, because the flip side to this is, whether we as herpetoculturists want to accept it or not, there are people taking these things out of the wild. And I can tell you that most wildlife biologists, they understand if you take a handful of black rat snakes out of the wild, it's going to do nothing. I mean, a really efficient predator can do that in a 24-hour period.
Yeah.
During emergence or something. So they get that. The problem is when, like with the turtle crisis, we have hundreds of wood turtles being taken out of one river in West Virginia. And we didn't realize that was happening. And the reason why it was happening is because we had this dumb rule in West Virginia that said you can take any turtle with a fishing license. So it was actually legal to go in and pluck out our wood turtles. But then that led to, the process went like this. And I don't think people oftentimes see the behind the curtain side of things. The biologists did not want to create blanket rules for everything. They wanted to protect wood turtles, box turtles, and spotted turtles, because snapping turtles and softshell turtles are actually harvested for food in West Virginia. They're part of the fishing industry. But the problem was when they were trying to do this species-specific regulation, the conservation officers, they asked them, can you identify these turtles? And they were like, we don't want to worry about identifying a turtle. We just want to know if we catch somebody with a turtle and they don't have this license, we can give them a ticket. And so that led to all turtles being protected, which, you can make arguments there. But anyway, but the reason why the regulations went into place in the first place was because of the fact that there were literally like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wood turtles that were being intercepted at JFK Airport in LAX on their way to Asia. And people were doing this thing called haplotype mapping, which is where you look at populations at a genetic level. And they were figuring out that most of the wood turtles that were being taken out heading to Asia, are a large percentage were coming from the Potomac watershed. And then that's mainly the West Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania populations. So like a regulation needed to happen because of, poaching. But I don't, at the same time though, the guy taking the wood turtles, he could have been a herpetoculture guy. He could have been somebody that just understood that there's some guy that wants to get these things to Asia and he's going to give me $100 for them. And all right, I'll go get everyone I can get, which, you know what I'm saying? So the conservation side of things, I think gets real messy and complicated and tricky quickly. And then it just, everybody ends up getting pissed. I don't know what else to say. So it's kind of you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't situation. Yeah,
no, absolutely. But then, I feel like a lot of the times then that comes along with regulation on captive bred animals, which, there's also multiple sides to that argument. But then from our side, it's like letting these exist in the free market helps protect the wild animals. And somehow the legislators haven't grasped this concept.
No, they haven't. In West Virginia, those regulations went to the point where they were kind of interesting. Like you weren't allowed to keep a garter snake because it's native, but you could walk out in your front yard with your 12 gauge and turn it into red paste because you were allowed to protect your property and children from a venomous reptile. And garter snakes aren't venomous, but they weren't going to hold the citizens responsible for being able to identify a venomous reptile. And so, we had chats about that. And we have one population of corn snakes in the state of West Virginia, which then meant that corn snakes were going to be protected. And the initial round of protections was like all corn snakes. And I said, like, you guys don't know how many corn snakes are in West Virginia. Like, there's probably 10 Petcos in West Virginia, and there's probably 10 corn snakes in each. So there's 100 corn snakes right now, and they're all little baby corn snakes that were captive bred. And initially, I don't think they really understood the magnitude of what, people like me were saying. And then they sent out conservation officers, start enforcing the regulations. And within a week of the regulations going into effect, I was having conversations with people about, there's a lot of corn snakes here. And I was like, yeah, so why don't you say if they're a snow or a albino or a hypo or a morph, or they have red eyes? I think New Jersey does something like that. Yep. You can Georgia have it. Too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if it looks like a normal corn, fine, you can't have it. And so they very quickly adopted that. So there's compromise, there. It's just, I don't think, not everybody does that. I mean,
sure.
And so, but you can also own, anything that's not native that you can own in the United States, you can own in West Virginia. So you can't have an Eastern garter snake, but you can have a black mamba. So,
very reasonable.
So anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a difficult conversation, but it's, at least in this instance with you having the connections that you do, it's good that there's someone in your position to be able to have influence like that. And, hopefully more states eventually end up in a situation like that.
Yeah. No, I'm for the most part okay to happy with West Virginia's regs, because they saw they realized also that this was an issue for them at the personnel level, because like, who the hell is going to enforce gathering up all these damn corn snakes off of everybody? And so, a compromise was proposed and they adopted it, which was nice. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, Alex, do you have a question you want to throw out there?
I just wanted to shed light right there. Like, I think that's just a perfect example of, I think, ways that, again, just seems like there's so much tension with herpetoculturists and these conservationists. And, I was talking with a contact in the DNR, and he said, at the end of the day, I'm not making the laws. I just have to enforce them. And it's like, so why should I be angry at him? It's like, well, if maybe we, all you had to say was albino corn snake. Don't own a normal. Okay, own a hypo tessera, so you get the normal color, but it's a pattern. You just have to prove. You have to prove that you have a miniature pincher and not a gray wolf, right? Like that's that. And so, I mean, again, like a line-bred barneck scrub python is not a Texas bull snake, because if somebody can identify one from another, and like a conservation standpoint, like, I don't know, I imagine, Stephen, like, you've got labels on your enclosures, and I think like in Florida for the venomous people, that's like a requirement. You have to have your species labeled. So officer can identify, again, let's just say in your case, Stephen, a scrub python from Timor. Well, his cage says Somalia amethystina, and that checks off as okay on our list. Great. Something small little bits like that, where, if you could just make it a little easier on everybody, you can keep your snakes. They can, protect the wild reptiles. And it just seems like you said, Zach, and, it just so much unnecessary headaches where, calm down, talk with people, and, open, honest communication is, I think, the way that we can sort of bridge that gap slowly and steadily. It just seems, you have one thing go wrong and everybody loses it. Not to continue the conversation here, Zach, something I'm curious then on regarding conservation in your work is the CCR Conservation Fund. So you had mentioned, in the world of academics, process of applying for grants. I had to take an entire course on writing grants. I did not like it. That's why I did it for a winter class where I had to do it just for 3 weeks straight. It was difficult. But from what I've listened to on your show, I mean, the CCR Conservation Fund seems like a really unique, truly more, in my opinion, almost clean-cut way to allow, in your case, access to funds, and then you're able to, sort of show the people what the research is doing, what the funds are doing. And I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that. And honestly, do you think like the CCR Conservation Fund might inspire other fields. I mean, not just herpetology and herpetoculture, but just other biological and conservation studies to follow a non-for-profit model of a conservation fund.
Well, before I go any further, this is going to end up sounding political. It's not, but you know, whether we want to admit it or not, right now it is absolutely a horrific time to be a scientist that relies on federal funding to fund the science that you do, because elements like Doge are going through saying, well, this is waste, and if it's waste, we're going to just take away that funding stream. I, in the past 2.5 months, have had, I think, the numbers changing, because I find out I lost it, and then I find out I got it back, because you know the agencies kind of fight to get it back. But I've lost $125,000 in grant funding, and when that happens, that's a student that I've recruited that I then have to tell, sorry, you can't get a degree, which is kind of gut wrenching. And that's opportunities that are gone. So facing that versus the Colubrid and Colubroid Radio Conservation Fund, which when we end up getting those dollars, they're there. It's safe. It's not going to be taken away. It is definitely a new avenue of funding conservation work that I intend on doing with my students. That I'm taking it very seriously in light of recent events. So we can just end that whole bit of the conversation there. But writing grants, it's an interesting thing. A lot of people don't realize that, like for me, I write all kinds of crayfish grants. That's the thing that I'm known for. And you get to a point where you are a struggling, fresh out of the boat, young scientist that has their early professorship, and you're trying to make a name for yourself, and you're getting like crumbs. That was early on in my career. Like I would get a grant that'd be like $6,000, and I thought, holy hell, I'm like rolling in it. But now the average grant that I was getting was somewhere around $125,000 to $200,000 to do the science that I need to. And it basically, you build this network, and you get to a point where people are like, oh, Loafman's the guy that does this. Let's go and talk to Loafman and see if he thinks he can potentially do this. And then you write a proposal for it and you get it. So you kind of build your career up to that point. My problem is I am professionally getting back into herpetology, and there are plenty of excellent herpetologists out there. And I don't want to necessarily be writing proposals competing for them that have gone through that process that I've gone through with crayfish. But then the other thing is with the Colubrid and Colubroid Radio Conservation Corps, there's research that I know that if I do it, it's going to lead to two things. It's going to have a huge impact with the conservation of these animals we love, but I can set the study design up in a way to gather all that evidence you were talking about with the evidence-based husbandry approach for a lot of species that we keep. And I can then gather that information up from the field and then prepare it and deliver it to herpetoculturalists. And that was something that seemed like a very novel and lucrative opportunity at the same time, to kind of help the legacy of CCR, if you will. And so Clint, love Clint to death. You say to that guy, maybe we should do something with conservation, and 48 hours later you have a nonprofit. That's what happened, because he's a business guy, and he it's great that he's not necessarily in academia like me, because academics move very slowly and it drives me insane. I don't move slowly. And I'm not used to working with people like Clint who are like, oh, we're going to do this. We're done. So that's pretty awesome. But what we're doing with the Conservation Corps is our goal is, I've got this field site now. I was literally there this weekend. I'm like so freaking pumped. I joined a project where there were these wonderful guys, Don, Jim, and Josh, Dr. Josh at Cornell College in Eastern Iowa. And they were studying ornate box turtles. And at the site they were studying, they were getting Western hognose snakes. And, that's kind of a mainstay of herpetoculture. Mm-hmm. And Josh is a turtle guy. And so the main focus was the turtles. And then they were taking data on the hogs. And I went out there to take pictures for a book I'm writing on hognose snakes. And after working with those guys, I was like, I have to work here. Like, it's 11 hours from home. It's in Iowa. I've never heard a single human being say, I can't wait to go to Iowa. And I literally can't wait to go to Iowa. And I just knew, like, we can study the ecology of these hognose snakes, create a management plan for them in the wild to help Iowa keep them, robust and strong, and these few populations they have left. And then at the same time, answer a bunch of really cool natural history questions about hogs, and then better their husbandry with natural history based studies. But the problem is there's not a grant for that. There is not a grant on planet Earth that I can write that's going to care about all of those things. Sure. Conservation Corps and basically asking for people that care about these things to fund it being funded by herpetoculturalists, that is just a win, because I, as a scientist, will tell everybody, I will go to the mountaintops and scream for the top of my lungs, this was funded by herpetoculture, and that's an important message, because that really says we're not all poachers. We're not what you think we are. Right. Look at what herpetoculture is doing. And now we're, creating a management plan based off an auction from Colubrid-Fest, because that's where all the money for the study we're doing right now, like I used auction money from Colubrid-Fest, which we put on with Show Me Reptiles, Clint and I. I bought receivers and antennas. I've purchased 20 radio transmitters so far. I bought 700 pit tags. That is a lot of pit tags, by the way. Didn't know you could buy them off of Amazon. That's a fun fact.
No. All right. Good to know.
Bought a bunch of pit tag readers. I bought backpacks. I mean, I'm buying field equipment with this stuff.
Yeah.
I've onboarded 3 graduate students now who their master's thesis is going to be at this site, studying the colubrid snake community. And it's just a win. And so if you do this, this way, I may never write a herpetology grant. I might just pursue this funding stream, and through the people that donate to our core, they're funding this. Colubrid-Fest's auction will always fund this kind of research. And I think it's a really novel way of doing research. And what's really interesting is I was curious when I started telling other professors, like, hey, I got a podcast, which led to Colubrid-Fest, which had a reptile show and an auction, and I generated money that then led to scientific enterprise. What do you think about that? Because I thought there might be some judgment. The thing is, I just don't care. That's where I am in my life.
Sure.
And it was actually really kind of uplifting and pleasant to see, a lot of people are like, that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Huh. And so it's just been a win all around. And I absolutely have to thank Clint for basically being like, oh, you want a nonprofit? Okay. And he did it in under a week. It was, and so now we're putting our money where our mouth is. I will absolutely say that. So,
yeah.
But yeah, no, we put in drift fences, and today, I got a message from the collaborators in Iowa that we got our first bull snake, and it was a recapture from last year.
Nice.
So yeah, no, it's going to be a really, really fun project. And I can't wait to just see how this metamorphoses and, evolves into herpetology and herpetoculture completely smashed together.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
Got a quick comment to hit on real quick. So Lisa says, besides Zach, I know that Dr. Emily Taylor has been relying on some crowdfunding, and she wonders if it'll be more common in academia. So other than the positive feedback are you now seeing this becoming something that is more popular throughout academia, or at least that other, professors and whatnot are crossing its possibility?
The short answer is yes.
Okay.
I know Dr. Taylor, I know Emily. We actually have a paper we did together with rattlesnakes and how people perceive them. And she is an inspiration for me, because with her, anybody listening to this, you need to go check out Project Rattlecam. I will literally sit at my computer, and I have 2 screens at work, and I will have the Project Rattlecam cameras up. If you don't know what this is, she's put cameras up on a rattlesnake den, and they record during daylight hours, and you can watch in situ prairie rattlesnakes doing their thing.
It's awesome.
And there's not a person around, and it is just the coolest thing on earth. but that was funded by like GoFundMe. And I think that is, I think the new wave of PhDs that are being produced, the board that is stereotypically shoved up the PhD's ass, it's not quite as far up there with the new generation. I think that we are all chilling out a little bit. Not all of us. There's definitely some that will drive you crazy and kind of fulfill that stereotype. But there's also quite a few of us that are pragmatic. We're scrappy. We want to do the science we want to do, and we don't want to be cornered by the grant opportunities. And so, if you want to do that, you got to be willing to do things like have auctions and have crowdfunding and basically have a social media presence and have people care about what you're doing. So I think that is definitely going to be more common, especially with all the federal funding being taken away.
Yeah.
So
kind of the necessity for a change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was just going to note, like, I just find it interesting that, like I said, you're saying a lot of this funding, I said, either being, federal and through grants, like zoos have been doing this forever, right? The other animal sector. So again, growing up in the Chicagoland area, like I remember walking through the Shed Aquarium, I had a family friend that was a donor. And so that, they have the plaque. So for zoos and aquariums, it seems like they're all, like a lot of them are funded by donors.
Oh yeah.
And so the fact that, like, from what you're saying, like this has just been totally off the books as far as academia, research, and conservation. I mean, everybody thinks, at least from, what I gather, like zoos, species survival programs and conserving them. It's like, but conservation isn't just zoos and always captive breeding. It's the research aspect. And the fact that for some reason, I guess, donors and zoos are one thing, at least, for now. And then it was grants and research. It's like, well, why don't we have donors and research? You know what I mean? Because I just feel like with the amount of money you see that anonymous donors put into zoos, imagine if, more of those funds are also put into research and actually, for lack of a better term, helping, the animals in the wild, gathering data from. I mean, it just seems like it's been untapped, honestly. And that's why I think it's, hearing this from you again, like it's huge what the CCR Corps is doing, because I think it's going to open gateways. And I mean, I won't lie, it's as a listener, it has had me scratching my head of maybe it is worth pursuing a master's, but I keep teetering back and forth between work, grad school, where
the issue with donors, because I'm a department head, so I have one of my jobs is to pursue. Not to pursue donors. I mean, that's every professor's job. Let's be real. Yeah. But one of the jobs is to kind of organize things like Day of Giving. We just had our Day of Giving, which is actually a month of giving. But we have one day where we go after people in a public sphere. And you are totally allowed at my university now to pursue a donor to fund a project. But under the leadership of our foundation, just 3 years ago, every donation that went to the university was supposed to go towards scholarships. So that's where things get a little wonky is, I would love to fund the research that way. And I have had a couple people very generously sell a snake. They make money. And then before we had the Conservation Corps, they would then donate it to the foundation and say, I want this to go to Zack so he can help his students out.
Yeah.
And so two people have done that historically. And so it depends on the school or the entity you're at, what that, the higher ups ultimately control the flow of the funds. The thing about zoos that's really interesting is not all zoos are created equal. And that's something everybody needs to know about zoos. There are, zoos that are great. There are zoos that are bad. There are zoos that are okay. There are zoos that are excellent. There are zoos where you can make money. There are zoos where you will be permanently in poverty. Like it. So you just kind of have to know that sphere. But zoos like the St. Louis Zoo, they have their conservation projects are absolutely insane. And they have somehow in the St. Louis Zoo been able to figure out ways for people in the greater Missouri, all across Missouri, they pay taxes into conservation. They pay income taxes, all these taxes. A certain part of that goes to conservation. And then a certain part of that goes to the zoo to fund their conservation work. And there's a curator there, Justin Eldon, who's doing stuff with Armenian vipers and stuff with hellbenders, and is starting to do some stuff with, I think, down the neotropics. And that's all being funded by, donations, taxes. And you would be insane to think I haven't looked at that and thought, how can I model this? Because this is a pretty cool setup. So, but I do think, change brings necessity of coming up with new ideas. And that is where we are currently in the world that I live in. And so this is working, and hopefully it continues. And I'm pretty proud of it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, as you should be. Well, real quick, since we're about at the midway point of the show, we're going to go to our commercial break real quick. But sit tight, everybody. We'll be back in a few minutes with the rest of the conversation.
Sorry for the interruption, folks, but a quick word from our sponsors. Green tree pythons, emerald tree boas, and plenty other arboreal snakes have been quite the popularity here at the Trap Talk Reptile Network, which brings me to today's sponsor, the Reptile Perch. Head over to the reptileperch.com and Reptile Perch on Instagram. See what type of design PVC perch is best for your arboreal reptile. But first and foremost, I would also check out David Brahms' Green Tree Python availability on the website. And you can also check out his Instagram just to stay current on any projects or any productions that he posts. Thank you so much, David Brahms, for your ongoing support. Looking forward to seeing what you have to show in the 2025 season. When you think about building a good community and being a leader of that community, nobody comes to mind better than Mark Hager over at Texas Chondros. That's right. Make sure you head over to TX Chondros on Instagram and also head over to Mark's website. See what he has available green tree python wise, and be ready for quite the 2025 green tree python breeding season out of Mark Hager. He's a veteran in the green tree python game, one of the best and nicest breeders in the green tree python game. He's been putting on the whole state of Texas for as long as I've known him. So if you want to see all the amazing other chondro keepers out of the state of Texas, another good reason to go follow Mark Hager over at TX Chondros on Instagram. And again, head over to his website, texaschondros.com. You can find all the links in the description below. Thank you so much, Mark Hager, for supporting the trap. Tree. Sorry for the interruption, folks, but a quick word from our sponsors. One of the things I love the most about the reptile world is reptile businesses that are family oriented. I love the Rice Reptile family. Rice Reptiles have made quite the name for themselves over the last couple of years, rebranding themselves and also bringing amazing cutting edge, front of the line ball python projects that you must check out. Again, make sure you head over to their website, ricereptiles.net, Rice Family Reptiles on IG, to give them a follow, see what they have coming out. You can catch them vending at all major NARBC shows, Southeast Reptile Expo. A lot of great stuff coming from this family. So again, thank you so much, Billy, Don, over at Rice Reptiles. If you're in the ball python game in 2025, you know what you should be doing with your sheds, and that's turning them in to get them tested. That's right, no more POS hets, no more 66% hets. We can find out directly through today's sponsor, and that sponsor is Rare Genetic Inc. Thank you so much, Ben and Sean over at Rare Genetic Inc. Head over to their website, raregeneticinc.com, and head over to their YouTube channel and make sure you subscribe to their YouTube channel. They put out a video every Wednesday to update you guys on new current events over at RGI. But I got to tell you right now, very excited to continue my partnership over at Rare Genetic Inc. Head over to their Instagram account. Make sure you follow them on Instagram, subscribe, hit that notification bell on their YouTube channel. That way you're current on new announcements and anything that they got to update you with. Again, thank you so much, Rare Genetic Inc. RGI, you guys are the best student in the game.
All right, everybody, we are back. So thank you for the patience with the commercials. Alex, I'm going to throw it to you for our next topic.
Yeah, so to shift some gears, Zach, this is just a question I wrote down as someone who is a former student at a university, but I'm sure you've taught dozens, hundreds of students, but given the zoo science program, given now, again, the extensive amount of research you've done, have you had some highlight moments in your career as a professor that has had like a student say something out of the blue that you've been able to, I guess, had like an aha moment in your herpetocultural endeavors, especially now that you teach a herpetoculture class? I can't even imagine the amalgamation of ideas that students bring from their perspective and while you've been doing this for a long time, even though you said you had that break, I'd like to think there's got to be just some brilliant things brought up, and I'm curious to hear what you've got to share.
Yeah. So in the class, the class's title for the undergrads is, well, actually, and I teach a grad class, the same thing. It's herpetology and herpetoculture. So it's not herpetology, it's not herpetoculture, it's both disciplines under one umbrella. And for the undergrad class, the lecture is all your classic herpetology course that a lot of people take. And then when you take that class, a lot of times the lab for the herpetology class will be, you learn the regional reptiles and amphibians for where you're at. Like the class I took at Marshall when I was getting my master's with Dr. Polly, that was what I did. And so I realized I got to get the herpetoculture in here too. So my lab is all herpetoculture. And it's, and here again, a lot of that material came from listening to podcasts and reading, old vivarium magazines, talking to people. And so we do a lecture on, thermoregulation and thermal husbandry. There's two lectures on lighting because of the whole UVB thing. We have a lecture on the history of herpetoculture. We have there's a lecture on the differences between sterile, naturalistic, and bioactive keeping. And so I do that for like the first third of the course, and then all kids get a project. And for the zooci students that want to do the husbandry side, we buy them great big PVC enclosures, and then they have to build a background, create a substrate mix, put in lights, basically deck that thing out like it would be at a zoo. And it all is evidence-based. It's all based off that paper you saw me present. And it's hard to talk about this without you seeing the product of that work.
Sure.
But there were definitely some students where, I'd seen their work ethic up to that point in time. And I thought like, okay, I'm going to get like a stick and a brick. That's what this is going to end up being. And then they end up, decking out a Loafman enclosure, and it looks like damn near identical to the red center of Australia. Or we had a student do twin spotted rat snakes, Alethe bimaculata, which are a temperate Asiatic rat snake. And he said, I would like to have a 4 foot tall, 2 foot deep, and 4 foot wide viv for these snakes. And I thought, well, that's a little extreme for some colubrids that only get to be about this big, but hey, what the hell, let's do it. And I would challenge that build that my grad student did to anything I've seen in any zoo. I mean, it looks like an artist that could sculpt, made a rock background that is identical to a rock background he found in the province of China where bimaculata lives. And then we did a biotope. So I do a lot of, I try to stress, like, if you can get the plants that are native to the area, let's get them. And in that part of China, there's a couple maples. So he was able to actually find fake Asiatic maple tree branches. And so, and so that's what's really been kind of fantastic about that class. And historically, when you teach a biology course, you're not having your students basically do something that could be considered art. And so it's really cool to watch these kind of, rigid science students let their inner artist go. And I tell them, like I say all the time in the herpetoculture class, there is an art to this. Whether you want to accept it or not, this discipline has an art, and you got to embrace that and be creative and, be dynamic and not necessarily just do the whole stick and brick. That's what I oftentimes refer to, which is ironic because right now, these right here are sticks and bricks. They're getting overhauled over Easter break. So anyway, so that would definitely be the thing. The other thing is, I've had some moments in the field with my herpetology students that were like mind-blowing to me. One that comes to mind is I had a neurodivergent student, and everybody loves this kid. And he said, I would like to go on a field trip with you, and I was like, okay. So we went to the Poconos, and I wanted to find Eastern hognose snakes to get a bunch of pictures for the upcoming hognose book. And so I've learned the way that you can't ever guarantee a hog in the wild, but the secret is to get as many eyeballs looking for them in the area as you can, and then your probability of encountering them goes up. And particular student was moving very slowly behind us all, and he was starting to frustrate us a little bit because we need to get down the railroad tracks where we were herping. And so finally I said, all right guys, you go and I'll hang back with the student. And I was standing with said student. I was taking pictures of a snake actually, and I heard him just say, I think I found one. Like everybody else was like, oh my God, I found one. Like, I mean, it was like this complete, and he was just very calmly, I think I found one. And so I walked over and I'm looking at the ground and I'm like, well, where is it, bud? And he goes, it's about an inch down in there. And he had seen less than a square centimeter. I mean, it was like 6 scales of a young of the year, a neonate eastern hognose snake that was traveling like underneath the rocks. And I thought, holy hell, but he was able to focus more than everybody else that I had. Yeah. And so I thought, great, this is fantastic. And so I caught the snake and I took a bunch of pictures, and then it takes me about 15, 20 minutes to get the pics. And then I walked back to him. He's like, I got another one. And I was like, what? I was like, and so sure enough. So like, I was not at all prepared for that. I mean, he was literally seeing snakes you could not see. Like and it was a wonderful case where his neurodivergence just enabled him to focus better than anyone else. And where all of us had like the patience of a coked up squirrel, this guy was able to just very deliberately look, and he was finding all these animals that we missed. So that was a special thing for me. And it was also kind of a eye-opening moment of like, slow down when you're out there. You don't have to be like ripping and roaring. And by the end of it, I think he found a third, if I'm remembering right. Wow. That was it. And I've also had just really fun moments. I'm big on teams. Like I run all my field crews as it's a team. And I went down to Florida on a spring break trip to look for Florida Kings. If you listen to the show, you know that I'm a locality Florida King keeper. And I wanted to go to the cane fields and see these infamous king snakes. And I had an idea of a project, but I wanted to see if we could find them in density. And we didn't. But we went down there and we grinded and we grinded and we grinded in the cane fields. And we inevitably found the canal that I was just convinced they were there. We found a couple sheds, so that was part of the reasons why. But we weren't finding the snakes. We were finding everything but them. We were finding tons of snakes, just no kings. And if you know Phil Wolf, he's on the THP network. Met up with him, and Phil came out to the road that we were on, and Phil was like, hey, we're going to go to another road. And I said, well, I kind of want to stay here. And Phil was like, no, I'm going to take you to a road. So I said, all right, guys, you stay here, and I'll go with Phil, and we'll divide and conquer. And we had driven like 25 seconds down the road, and I looked at my phone started ringing. It was my grad student, Aaron, and I answered it, and it was just after dark. And I was like, hey, what's up? And she goes, turn around because we just found a freaking king snake. And that was like, I almost opened up the door and rolled out onto the ground, sprinting back up, because we had put in 4 grueling ass days of flipping rocks and road cruising and trying to stay in the 70-degree isotherm at nighttime, and seeing how excited they were. And that's the thing that gets me more than anything is like when I see the students nerding out the way that I nerd out, I know they get it. Yeah. And that is that's what keeps me doing this. It's not funding. It's not the paycheck. It's not, being the department head. It's being out in nature or being in the laboratory and being there when, the kid looks and sees a hognose snake no one could see, or that king snake moment's way up there for me. And then the other one is, and I know Steven keeps Willardi, I think. Is that right? Yes. It was my first Willardi that I ever found. I went out with same student, Aaron and Alec. They were my grad students. We went to the biology Pit Vipers meeting, and we had driven out to where Willardi are. And we actually were looking for clobs clobber eye, not willard eye, because I had said to everybody, we're not going to get a willard eye, so get that out of your head.
Yeah.
And then Murphy must have heard that. And this monsoon rolled in on us, and we were down a dirt road, and it, rivers of water going down the road.
Yeah.
We're in a rental car. I was like, Jesus Christ, we're going to get stuck out here. And we were able to kind of get back up on top of the mountain, and we were driving out, and the snake was silver and it was glowing in the headlights. And I knew immediately what it was. I mean, I don't know how I knew what it was. I just knew that's a freaking willard eye.
Yeah.
And I yelled like, oh my God, we got an effing willard eye. And I was like, go faster, because Alec was driving. So then he did. And I was like, what the hell are you doing? Slow down, because I didn't want him to run it over. So it was like this funny moment. But those are what I live for. Like,
yeah,
that's the best. It's the absolute best. And then we're all jumping up and down. There's lightning cracking around us. I mean, it was just perfect. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that to me is definitely the thing.
No, it does. I don't know. Having been a student, and like, I had one of my former professors on this segment. He's a pit viper biologist, Dr. Robert Jaden. And so he, as to say, just listening to him lecture, he was I guess not the head, but like the academic advisor for the herpetology society I had on campus. Yeah. Just hearing the stories and stuff. And I guess that's why I wanted to hear your perspective as a professor, where, I'm the student taking info from the professor, but what were some of your student highlights?
Those are definitely some of the herping highlights for sure.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Another thing that I wanted to move forward with then is, and specifically, because I have to share this again, your book, the concept of evidence-based keeping that you presented, because I just think for me, that was such a huge eye-opener. When I authored my article in Reptiles magazine 2 years ago on the Indo-Chinese water dragons, I took a lot of your aspects of that and just citing as many peer-reviewed sources as possible for the sake of backing up, like, why do we do this? And again, it's one of those where, with your presentation and just the concept of, you keep it at 89 degrees, you feed it a rat once a week, you get follicular development, you get eggs, but why?
Yeah.
And so I'd be curious to sort of go into that, especially given your work with, your beautiful dipsodid snakes, the false water cobras, and some of the oddball stuff, which I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, I don't think we've really had a false water cobra segment. So who better than, Dr. Loafman here? And I guess what I'd like to hear, and I'm sure the listeners would too, is given your passion for hydrodynasties, Gygus, on top of the evidence-based keeping model, and you do mention the natural history and stuff in your book, but for those that are listening, like, when you were working with the species and you were tying in the aspects that you define under evidence-based keeping, use hydrodynasties as your example. But let's say, I see Lisa in the chat, right? Like, so Lisa's well known for her work with white-lip pythons, Riley, carpet python. Like, what is the mindset that you go into with, say, any new species, but in this case, for the example, say it's your beloved false water cobra, into starting to make adjustments? Because I'd like to think you probably had some ideas drilled in your head with, this is how false water cobras are kept. Well, now we're going to change it here. And how do you shift your thinking as a keeper, as a scientist, following these principles, but also not like just burning yourself out like, I'm a terrible keeper and I'm keeping everything wrong? That's a terribly long-winded question.
That's fine. So my mantra is, there is no dogma. So at any point, anything can change. And if you go into it with like, this is the way it's done, because this is the way we've always done it, and it works for me, there is an element of truth. If you're trying to get eggs, or you're trying to get the animal to live, or you're trying to get the animal to grow, obviously that's working for you. But the issue is, what works for one person is not necessarily going to work for all people. And I know, like, here in my house, I don't know why, I cannot figure it out, but absolute true desert specialist species, I can't keep them in here. I don't know if I've got, if it's poor airflow, if it's if I have this kind of background humidity level with my house.
Yeah.
And so if I were to do what somebody else did all the time and it doesn't work for me, I'm not going to be able to troubleshoot that. But if I go into it knowing I got to figure out my room, I got to figure out what applies to me, and I got to figure out the biology of the beast, that then drives my keeping. I can use what that person did all the time as a guide, but it's not like definitive black, white, the end, done. And so that's where going to the books and getting the data from the wild is to me the best way to develop a keeping strategy, because then I am going and using the skill sets that I've ascertained over time as a biologist and a naturalist and a herpetoculturalist and an all-around nerd to kind of put together a framework of a husbandry strategy that I'm then going to employ. And then it's not dogma either. And so have this series of checks and balances where I'm going to basically be willing to say this isn't working. But if I understand the biology, which is where that evidence part comes into play, a little bit better, I might be able to then figure out why it's not working. Because that why part, why is this not working? That is tricky. If you really want to understand the why, you got to understand the biology, in my opinion. So like, great example right now. There's a snake in that book I talk about, Paraphimophis rustica, the brown musarana. I have a pair of these. It took me forever to get them. Clint hates them. Clint hates brown snakes. These things are brown snakes. There is nothing sexy about a Paraphimophis rustica except its biology, right? And it took me forever to get a pair. I've had this pair, and they absolutely breed like rabbits. I put that male in there, and he will lock up with that female within 10 minutes. He's actually literally locked in under a minute, which is the only snake I've had that's done that.
Wow.
Okay. So I have no problem with reproducing, with getting the act of reproduction. I don't have an egg yet. And so if I don't know the biology of that snake, I'm just going to be like, oh, well, it's just broken. But I know the biology of that snake. And I finally think I figured out why they're not doing this, because I did the deep dive on Paraphimophis. And this is a South American snake, and it lives in the Chaco and the Cerrado, but it also lives in the pampas grasslands that go all the way down into Argentina and Uruguay and, down into temperate South America.
Okay.
And when I received these snakes, I was told if you brumate them at I was told by one guy, you don't have to brumate them at all. I was told by another person, if your room gets down to like the low 60s, it's going to be fine. Well, I've done that now twice. It didn't work. But now, because I did the deep dive on their biology, I know that they're part of that pampas grassland biome, which gets pretty far down in South America. When I went on the Weather Spark and looked at the, their equivalent to winter cools, it gets all the way down to the upper 30s. So next year, the Paraphimophis are going to be treated like a freaking corn snake, and they're going in my infamous corner. But, no one knows that. And the people that have successfully bred them in the United States have always lowered their temperatures into the upper 60s, because there's only like 2 people that I know of that have done it. Right. So that's why, I'm not saying my approach is the best or this approach is the best. I also just think this is so much more fun. Like, if you really nerd out and learn about the biology of your animals, you'll see them doing things you don't even know they're doing a thing. It's like that whole chance favors the prepared mind. I was watching my false water cobras one day, and they do this crazy thing where everybody knows they flatten out their neck, but they will choose to flatten out like the middle third of their body under their basking lamps. And I was like, what the hell is that? And sure enough, there's a paper that talks about thermoregulatory behavior. And these snakes have been seen cryptic basking with the part of their body that's outside being flattened of a crevice, and the rest of their body up in the crevice is like a circle. So I didn't know they did that till I read that article. It explains what my snake's doing. And then I end up, kind of having a little nerd nugget of happiness. Like, oh my gosh, they do that in Argentina, and mine's doing it in West Virginia. That's cool. So this evidence-based approach, I just think it makes you appreciate your animals more. And that's one of the things I really like about it. So yeah, I absolutely, that's just the way I do all things, but I definitely try to get as many, bits and pieces of knowledge. And writing the book was a selfish enterprise because those are all the animals that I keep. And it basically gave me a reason to do my nerdy deep dive. And I ultimately had an outlet for it. So, but yeah, no, I love doing things this way. And all my courses, this is what I teach. If you're my grad student, this is the discipline of herpetoculture that I teach. Undergrad, they read that paper. That paper actually started off as just me writing an outline to the undergrad assignment, and then it evolved into that manuscript. So
I'd like to think too that, one, you're researching this and it makes you appreciate the in a sense, knowing what your animals are doing or what your animals are attempting to do based on the parameters you're replicating in captivity. But like you were saying with your Musarana, on the, starting, at our conversation at the beginning, the idea of just, we're trying to get stuff to breed in captivity.
Yes.
You can't treat, here you are realizing that through all your research, other than the two people that, for lack of a better term, maybe they're just lucky with their situation. Had you not done the research on the biology, there's a very good shot that you might not have never been able to figure out how to, get eggs. You're getting the locks, but triggering that ovulation. Something that comes to my mind, especially is there's a channel on YouTube called CrocDoc2, David Kirshner, and he has an entire segment on the reproductive biology and captive husbandry of varanids. And it's like, had someone not done the endocrinology studies of Varanus, people already say Varanids are so difficult to breed. And, someone like Mr. Kirshner had done that research. He made it into a digestible form, YouTube videos. And now we're seeing so many more people breeding some of these odd monitor lizards. Like there was a guy in Illinois last year that bred Varanus dorianus for the first time likely in the world. When I spoke with him at the Tinley Park show, he literally said, yeah, I just knew how to watch her. And he had mentioned he had seen those videos because he was able to identify vitellogenesis and cryptic basking and belly hang. I'm referencing Varanids. I'm more of a lizard person myself. But from what you're saying with your hydrodynasties, you're seeing your animals cryptically bask. Having read your book, the idea of how they're opportunistic breeders, that was a huge success for me at my work, was just waiting for random low pressure systems. And honestly, I just kept throwing the male in with her.
That's all it takes.
Yeah. And then again, I just then food cycling, right? Had I not read the literature, and again, you've cited your sources, that allowed me to have success with a snake that for, whatever reason was sort of breeding just kind of on and off and randomly. And I'm hoping I'll be able to replicate that following the techniques, instead of just hoping things work magically. You only throw dry dirt at the wall so much and you're going to have one particle stick. And maybe you could say it worked, or it's because your hand just got sweaty and tired of throwing dry dirt. And that's why it's sticking. So like I said, I think it's a phenomenal concept. I really do wish you the best of luck getting those Musaranas. That sounds phenomenal. Yeah. Well, and I think, again, it's just, in my opinion, a genius concept that it might, one, as you said, develop other people to appreciate their animals for what they're doing in captivity, but two, sort of unlock the key to more captive reproduction. Because if we're treating everything the same, not everything. Like you said, there's 2,800 different species of colubrids and colubroids. So
there's going to be some differences. That's for sure. Yeah.
And
I see Lisa's comment in the chat. The hognose staying just below the sand. Would that be cryptic basking? That is the ultimate form of cryptic basking because they are actually out of sight. Hognose snakes have captured my attention, and they haven't captured my attention for the reasons that most people keep hogs. Naturalistic keeping of hognose snakes is like one of the absolute coolest things any snake keeper can do. I know people, look at them as like the crested gecko of herpetoculture now, and they're starting to get this, kind of stigma amongst the like serious herp keepers, but I think that's BS, because if you give them sand and dirt and rocks and, you know, plant grass and do all that in one of their vivs, their behaviors are insane. Like, they'll dig. They do this thing where they will literally, they look like the worms from Dune. So you see them just moving underneath the surface, and they'll get up next to, if you can get a root wad down into the soil in your viv, they'll bump into that, and then they'll coil up real quick, and they'll shuttle up, and then they shuttle down so that their spine is just exposed. And if the lamp is there, they will sit there for like 2 or 3 hours. I mean, it's insane. It's to me, that is just wonderfully cool. And that is actually something I can't wait to use the radio transmitters, by the way, because I saw them doing this as a herpetoculturalist, and now I want to go out and see if they're doing it as a herpetologist, and that would be a fun little reverse engineering of where herpetoculture led to some herpetology insight, because people know they go underground. That's well known. But that they may actually be doing this kind of just under the surface basking thing. That would be really cool to find out that if they do that or not.
Yeah.
But they're very interesting snakes in a naturalistic vivarium. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say, especially with the hog nose, that'd be, from what I understand, I mean, they're dipsotids, and the collection I curate, we have mostly morphs and stuff for breeding for the pet trade. But even then, I was never allowed to work with those in Illinois because they were technically state endangered. I want to say they're found in 2 counties, the Plains hognose, Nassicus specifically. But up here in Minnesota, it's just been really interesting because I've bred king snakes and corn snakes, and we have various king snakes. But with our setup, even in the racks, I don't know, they act different. Like I don't know how to describe it. Like, we've got hides and like everything's we've got just shredded aspen substrate. But with the way I have our rows of racks aligned, is there's these giant bay windows, and it's been really cool because from what the owners have told me is that they were previously kept where they couldn't see any outdoor light whatsoever, and man, like they naturally went off food earlier last year, which is phenomenal. So because like they're seeing the actual UVA.
They are dialed in to light.
And it's just phenomenal. I've noticed, especially this year, because it's been such like a weird winter. Like they're much more aggressive still, the males, with their copulation attempts now, because we've just had such a weird winter. It's almost like winter was pushed back. Now it's finally warming up, which typically we'd wake stuff up in February, and yet most of the action's now happening April. Like I said, I think they're really cool. I like that they're diurnal. Maybe one day if I have more room, I'd look into keeping them. I personally like the Simus, those little Mexican, or Southern, not Mexican. Geez. They're just something different, something cool. But like I said, just super interesting snakes, and I'm very excited to see your what becomes of your research and what your students are doing, because I think in my opinion, I think they're one of the best pet snakes people can own nowadays, because the diurnal factor, I've been enjoying it. I'm working with hundreds of them, but I'd imagine, people who think like a bearded dragon or something is cool, but don't want to deal with a big insect messy lizard, or insectivorous messy lizard, having a snake that's actually out when you're up might be, I think it's definitely part of the drive of why they're becoming more popular, but, tie in these aspects of natural history and naturalistic keeping styles. And to me, that's just like having a fish tank, honestly.
It is.
You know what I mean? Like during the day too. So I don't know. It's exciting. Heck yeah.
Absolutely. Do you have anything else, Alex? I know you had a few more questions lined up.
So yeah, I did. So then, aside from the evidence-based keeping, something that I do want to, I don't want to like start guiding the conversation down sort of, I guess, like a tense topic. So we discussed about hobbyists and sort of like, conservation and academics, and a little bit of the tension there. One thing that, and you sort of hinted at this with, and we had talked on it, like working with the authorities, but in your opinion, given, it sounds like you're head of your board, you're got the CCR Conservation Corps to start, having hobbyists fund this research. what are some other areas or outlets, given your perspective, because again, you're conservationists and you're really into herpetoculture, that you would like to see the industry sort of shift towards to keep mending that bridge of support for the, again, the DNR, and like what are some aspects that I guess you think that industry could change? I don't know. I had it worded slightly differently, and now that I'm looking
I know
at
where
it,
you're going.
yeah.
I have.
Jesus.
I'm just going to be real and honest with this one. Everybody has skin in this game, and all sides have their faults, and all sides have their aspects that are nothing but good. Okay, there are a handful of things. Ideally, I would love to see herpetoculture do. And this is going to end up sounding somewhat self-serving. And for the record, when I start talking about funding, you don't have to give a dime to CCR. Okay. So the thing that herpetoculture is good at, really good at, we're really good at breeding things. We're really good at the kind of fun side of herpetology and herpetoculture, in that we are welcoming. I know, like a Facebook group, you're like welcoming. I'm not talking about that, but like walking up to some academic who doesn't look above your navel versus walking up to some breeder that's like, hey man, look at this. This is cool. Let's be real. The general public's probably going to gravitate more to the enthusiastic, outgoing individual. Okay. That is a strength of herpetoculture right there. Alrighty. Because we're the gateway drug. I tell everybody that.
Sure.
If you're 6, you don't give a shit about a p-value. You don't even know what a p-value is. Okay. And the academics, we get so hung up on p-values and statistical design and our ivory tower. And I just want to like shake the ivory tower and be like, can we not just say that the snake looks badass because it's red, white, and blue or whatever the hell it is? Okay. And that's what herpetoculture does really well. The other thing that herpetoculture does extremely well is generate money. That is a very powerful element of herpetoculture because it is, in many ways, there's like the academic side, there's the zoo side, and then there's the industry of herpetoculture.
Yeah. And
we generate quite a bit of money. And whether we like it or not, money talks. And I have oftentimes thought, if the powers that be in North American private herpetoculture like sat down at a table, if everybody took a deep breath and you strategized a little bit and thought about, is there a conservation project or two that we could help augment financially that has a little bit of flair to it, a little bit of public appeal to it, and that involves a reptile, and you fund it. And as part of that funding, say, we would just like to get some credit for what we're doing. I think that would go an extreme way to help the private sector of herpetoculture. For instance, I don't know anything about them. I just know they exist and that they're really cool snakes. But the species of snake as well, I think it'd be cool if there was a species of snake that is present in the trade. So very easy. Louisiana pine snakes, eastern indigo snakes. There's 2 right off the bat that we keep as keepers, and they're in dire need of assistance in the wild. And then pick a taxa that nobody keeps in the trade. So giant garter snakes, Thamnophis gigas or gigas. Clonophis kirtlandi, the Kirtland snake. These are all animals that desperately need help. And so if we had a Tinley, I'm not calling out Bob, I'm simply saying if we had a Tinley or we had a Schomburg and we raise all that money at that auction, maybe we give 5% or 3% or 2% to a conservation project. Or at the door, increase the ticket price by $2. Nobody's not walking through the door for $2 more.
Sure.
And that $2 goes towards Louisiana pine snake conservation. And so now everybody's going to Tinley. Think about how many people walk through that door. Okay. And then we turn around and go, oh, great, Louisiana pine snakes, here you go. I feel like that would be an insanely powerful way to bring those people to the table, because whether we like it or not, money talks. And we are showing it's not all about money. And for many of us, it's not. For some of us, it is. I mean, it's disingenuous to think that there aren't breeders out there that care more about their money than their animals. We all seen them.
Sure.
But hopefully there's more of us that care about our animals. But I feel like that, or, find some national park, find some county park, find some bit of land that has a diverse snake community, and find out that park wants to increase its acreage and they need like $60,000 to do it. Okay. We're going to take the money from this show and we're going to basically give it to this park to increase their acreage, that increases snake community, something to that effect. That I think that's like the secret bullet that everybody's missing. I feel like if you got organized and you did that, like imagine if we have the regulations in Florida, right? And we don't like the regulations that are in Florida. Indigo snakes are in Florida. So what the hell would happen if from the Daytona show, we generated $80,000, $60,000, $20,000, $10,000 to go to indigo conservation?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? It's really hard to make us the villains in that dynamic.
Yeah.
And that is a secret bullet that I feel like everybody is just kind of missing, because it's done in conservation all the time. It's called, I studied crayfish in the coal fields of West Virginia, and there was a coal mine that, basically they were about to give me funding to study the crayfish. And there were people that were like, you can't take their money. I'm like, why the hell can I take their money?
Yeah.
Their heart is in the right place here. We can't villainize them forever. So I feel like that's something that we could do. And then the other thing is, I feel like you need to find that I keep saying you. I feel like herpetoculture needs to find the voices that kind of have their feet in all the different worlds, and then recruit them to do some action for them. Like, I would totally go to the table, because I can speak conservation biologist, I can speak herpetoculturalist. That's the missing piece, is we just don't have those pieces. Because I've heard a lot of people say on the herpetoculture side, I could breed indigo snakes. Why don't I just breed indigo snakes and let them go? Well, that Fish and Wildlife indigo snake breeding program has funded an insanely detailed genetic mapping of every single indigo snake that's in AZA and in Fish and Wildlife. Yeah. And they've looked at these things called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. And they figured out that if we breed this one to this one to this one to this one, that's going to maximize our heterogeneity, and we're going to get out of a genetic bottleneck. Like, we can't do that. Okay, yeah. But hell, you bring Ben in from RGI, and I bet we could. But anyway, so maybe we would fund something like that. But I feel like the money, whether we like it or not, that's the thing. If you really want to make people look at you as doing some good or shutting them up, you hit them that way. And I feel like that is something that we could very easily do. And I shouldn't say hit, because if you go to a true conservationist, they are going to at least hear you. There's at least going to be a conversation.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That was a very long-winded answer, but I've thought about that a lot. And I feel like that's something that nobody's really doing right now. Yeah. And then the other thing is, all the different pieces, the private sectors, the zoos, the academics, the conservation agencies. If you make a Venn diagram, we should all be in the same circle. And we're not. We're all like little wedges of circles.
Sure.
And I just think there's an element of ego there that we all just need to take a freaking breath and realize that each part of the Venn diagram has its strength. each part has its weakness. And if we really are here for the snakes, we should all come to the freaking table and figure out how to use those strengths from all the groups to then promote the conservation of snakes. That's one of the reasons why I will forever stand up for private herpetoculture, because you don't have to convince us to save snakes. We're like the one group of people that love them from the onset. So why the hell would you alienate us? I don't understand that. Just because there's some bad apples in our, ilk, that doesn't mean we're all bad apples. That's just BS.
Right.
Anyway.
So I guess, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, do you think that some of these set in stone negative mindsets, competitiveness and whatnot may just kind of age out of this world as a whole?
I'm going to be opportunistic. There's not opportunistic. I'm going to be optimistic.
Optimistic.
Maybe opportunistic
is herpetologists.
Yeah. And some might say naive, but I do tend to lean on the side of hope. Even in this world we find ourselves in today, like, it's going to be a better day. There will be. And I have seen people change their opinion. Some people, it takes a lot of work. But, you can't give up. But the worst thing you can do is just be like, oh, well, all academics are assholes and they're pretentious and they're not going to talk to us because they think they're better than us.
Right.
That's just not true. When you use the word all and you use the broad brush, we've got a problem. There's always somebody you can find that's probably willing to talk to you or at least hear your idea. And if you don't come in kicking and screaming, and you come in calm and lucid and you have a solid argument and you're non-combative and you just, lean on the fact that you want to care for the snakes and you do too. And why don't we figure out a way to meet in the middle, people? Yeah. I do think that is possible. So,
okay.
But the other thing, there's one other thing is there's also cultural norms. So I am going to call out the auctions. So when, you got somebody dancing around with a giant inflatable penis at an auction, that is a bad look. No one is taking you seriously if you're in a professional agency. Yeah. Like, don't do that shit. Like, leave that behind. You can have a good time, but it's going to get on social media. And for the record, guys, those conservation agencies are all over social media. So if, this agency's promoting that and then they want to be taken seriously by the federal government, that's not happening. You've got to make sure you police yourself and the look you're giving, because if you want to be treated as a professional, you got to act like a professional. You can be a fun professional, but you got to be like just a little bit careful about what you're doing. So that's the other side to the coin, because I have talked to conservation agencies about herpetoculture and blah, blah, blah. And they've been like, oh, those people. And I'm like, well, I'm one of those people. So what are you saying? I always say that. They're like, well, I mean, come on. Did you see the blah, 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 blah? And I'm like, well, yeah. But,
Yeah.
So that's it.
No, it's a great point that's not talked about quite enough. And especially in a moment like that, where like this is the auctions are somewhat of a defining moment for our industry. People who absolutely hate each other will be in that same room together at that same time over the common cause and just act deplorably. Yeah. I'm no stickler, but like I'll be there sometimes. I'm like, what is this really fun at the 50th time you've auctioned off Jello shots and little penis jars or whatever?
Yeah.
Like, at some point, does this get played out? And like, does it, like, I don't know, it gets kind of hacky. Like, I don't, and then no thought of like, what are the repercussions of this tomorrow down the line? I don't know. And how old are we? Coming from one of the younger people in the room? Like, I don't know.
No, I just, you can have fun. You can even have the shots. You go to certain college things where we're raising money in an auction, they're shots. But think about the presentation, people. Like, you're not going to be taken seriously in that scenario, but you still have a good time. You still have fun.
And another aspect is there are many, many children in those rooms.
Yes.
Not only the children, there are animal rights activists undercover. There are, I mean, there are people who love to see every little minute of us looking like fools. But
yeah.
it
So
happens
just
regularly.
take that one piece of the puzzle out of there, and it's a great event.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Like,
I mean, raising 6 figures in like an hour and a half for USARK, like that's a spectacular thing considering some of the stigma that exists on our industry. So if you look at that as on its own, I mean, you can't critique that in any way, shape, or form until you look at some of the little minutia involved, and you're like, oh, these people aren't serious at all. It's like, no, we've all just, we've all busted our ass all day on Saturday at the show, vending and this and that, and everyone's been drinking since half an hour before the show ended, and now here we are acting like total idiots. So I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely it's a touchy subject, but I'm glad you brought it up because it's not talked about nearly enough.
Well, I mean, I would love to go to those auctions. I can't step foot in that auction. What the hell happens if I'm the department head of my biology department? I can't be seen in that environment, so I can't go to the damn. I choose not to go, but I go to the International Herpetological Symposium. They got an auction too. I'm right there in the front of it. You know what I mean? Because it's just a different presentation, and in the end, they both raise money. So I don't want people to think I'm a prude. I'm just saying, please know they're watching you. And it's being noted. I know this for a fact. So, I
mean, do you think just more focus on optics will be something that legitimizes us?
Absolutely. Optics. That's it. The guy that was juggling the ball pythons, that's not going to be forgotten. And we can do this great work that we're all, we're doing. But then the guy juggling, that's what's going to be remembered by the biologist that's making the, trying to support reptile shows. So, who's never kept a ball python in his life and has an academic background. Like, you got to look at it from the other angle here, people. And I don't think we do that enough. And then I guess the final thing on this is it does irk me deeply when science comes out. It's gone through the process, and then we don't like the result of the science, and then we're like, well, that's bullshit. I'm like, well, okay. Like tegus. I love tegus. They're one of my favorite lizards. I actually like them more than monitors. But tegus in Florida, whether we want to admit it or not, they are an environmental disaster. It's a freaking raccoon. That's an invasive. It eats everything. And it's one of the few things that can get into a gator nest. And then you hear like, oh, the tegus this is a complete overreaction. And there was an element of overreaction. I don't agree with saying we got to get rid of all the tegus. I think that the tegu breeders that were able to prove that they had their tegus contained and they weren't going anywhere, I felt like there should have been an inspection there, right? So there was overreach. But to say that the science behind some of the legislation with tegus is flawed and they have an agenda, that's just not true. It's also one of the very few lizards that can generate heat. So this is an animal, and that's a little bit of an simplification, but this is a critter. Now that it's loose, it can make its way up the coast into South Carolina, maybe up into North Carolina. And it's going to, ironically, be impacting primarily reptiles and amphibians. So as hurt people, we should actually care about that. I think in certain scenarios, we may want to really ask the question, is it worth it for the native reptiles to be able to have this one? If they're willing to let us have all the other ones, but they're saying not this one, I feel like that's a compromise kind of go in the other direction. So,
sure. Yeah, I mean, it's always tough because you don't want any if you can avoid it. But we've kind of, we've been set up in a bad situation.
Yes.
And we, at some point, we're faced with all or nothing or compromise. And I am personally not that all or nothing. I'd rather have all. That's why I moved to Texas. But if I'm faced with the option of that or nothing, and my opponent is the United States government, I might want to compromise. So I'm not totally steamrolled. So, and some people don't like that, and for good reason at times. But at the end of the day, this is where we are. We have to manage a situation accordingly.
Yeah. So that's the part where it's fine to say the science. Yeah, we get the science, but I can keep my animal contained. Why don't you set up an inspection system where you have to apply for a permit and then I get inspected? And if I get inspected and I pass it, I can have a tegu. You know, that to me is the model it should be, because then you get to keep the tegu.
Right.
And you're not raising a fit over, saying that the science is flawed when the science is not flawed. It's just not flawed. Like, you can do those ecological models all you want, and they're going to get that same result. And so I feel like working towards compromise is better, because when we kind of get our fists out and start really swinging, and we have to be provoked to do that, for the record, but it oftentimes ends in the outcome we don't necessarily want. So there you go.
For sure. Well, I want to go back to what you mentioned about the ball python juggling incident.
Yes.
I haven't brought it up on here yet. I don't think, but like, it's I mean, it's as ridiculous as something could possibly get. Maybe secondary to the individual who went to jail for assaulting an employee with a bearded dragon a little while ago, who is apparently at large again now, which is pretty neat. But anyway, so I saw that video when it actually first got posted by Jeremy Stone, and like 10 minutes in, I didn't even remember that I'd liked the Facebook page. I'm like, what the hell is this? I went back and I checked like 15 minutes later. I just said WTF in the comments. Like, there were already negative reactions on the video. It's like, no one likes this. So the video is gone. They take down the video when they're like, oh, okay, maybe this was a mistake. Maybe people don't like abusing animals. Crazy concept. Yeah. And then, 3 days later, everyone and their mom has shared the video. There are, and nothing from the original source. These are people who screen grab the video with the intent of reposting it and blasting it everywhere. So I get that there's a need to show like, hey, don't do business with this person. But for anybody who knows of this guy, you already know he's one of the scumbags of the industry, has been to prison for smuggling. Like, if you have history on this guy's a known commodity. Do we do more damage to ourselves by just putting this out there for the entire world to see when this video was originally uploaded for less than half an hour?
I think that we do. I remember it was the first thing that hit my feed that morning. And I was like, what? Same thing. I mean, our reactions were probably exactly like, what the hell is this? And now I know nothing about this guy because I'm not a ball python person or a boa constrictor person or whatever. And I just thought like, well, there's another dumbass doing dumbass things. What the hell? And then I scrolled and there he was again. And then I scrolled and there he was again and again. And I had the exact, like, I understand the public shaming and it is a good look to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But we just, there's this element of policing your own. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah,
I get it 100%.
Yeah. Like, and the thing that is unfortunate, I'm not saying everybody who shared this post has this kind of motive, but there was definitely a bit of self-aggrandizing going on there of, look at me, hey, this is bad, I'm saying this is bad, everyone agree with me, and let me get all my dopamines from my comments and my likes and my hearts. and meanwhile just making this seen as widely as it could possibly be. I mean, some of these posts had like hundreds of shares. The reposts, none of these were the original posts. Like, this is just, I mean, I think it's just taking the revolver and just shooting ourselves in the foot over and over and over again for our own sake. Yeah, for no purpose other than just that. Like, I can understand if you're someone who's new to the industry, but if you've been around for as long as any of us have, seeing this individual doing this kind of thing isn't really all that shocking based on who this person is. So then take it for what it is. This guy is, I'm not trying to just like bash. I don't want this, I don't want a message tomorrow, but like, there are bad people in this industry. This guy's on that list. The video went down. I mean, other than having those ball pythons not been thrown around in the first place, what else would you rather have happen in that moment other than that thing have a short shelf life?
That would have probably been best. Yeah.
I don't know.
And I see Riley has said, I disagree with juggling snakes, but our community doesn't police shit. I think certain elements of the community polices better than other elements.
Sure, for sure.
But I do think that there should be a little bit more policing.
Sure.
I think that would go a long way. I think that there's one of the things, as a conservation biologist, I'm a card-carrying conservation biologist. It has kind of always bothered me how we look at smuggling, and not that we all do it, but it's kind of like, well, how did we get those snakes here? Oh, well, they were smuggled in the 80s and the 90s, but it's okay now. And I'm kind of like, well, I don't, that doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah.
Let's not necessarily say it's okay now. Maybe be like, yeah, they shouldn't have been smuggled here, but they're here now and we're working with them.
Yeah.
That it's not even glorified. I don't know what it is, but I don't like that. Like I was naive when I was building the West Liberty collection, and I worked with some people that I should not have worked with, and I got some snakes that I should not have gotten. And as soon as I figured out what I did, I emailed people. I told people what the hell was going on. I asked, what the hell do I do with these things? I made a mistake.
Yeah.
I totally fessed up to what was going on. And nothing happened to me. Now, that might have been because I was at a school. I don't know. But then I basically indicated that individual, like, it's not cool what you're doing. I'm never working with you again. So I do think if a country has rules, Mexico set up its laws. Let's leave those damn animals in Mexico. Let's not suddenly be okay because well, they're here. We're going to breed them anyway. I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah, and one thing on that topic that I feel kind of strongly about is kind of like romanticizing certain individuals who took part in the mass smuggling for decades. How some of these people are revered as heroes in this industry. It's like, I'm not saying we should shame them, outcast these people, but let's call a spade as to what happened here, what these people did. And if you put it in the context of today, it's not a hero.
No.
Did some of these animals that made their way into captivity end up having a positive impact on their population, both in the wild and in captivity? Yeah. And in some instances, like particularly with some of the cyclura, that's a great example of animals that were smuggled. And now eventually, there's lots of in situ conservation work going on. There are more in captivity than we know what to do with some species. And maybe if those original smugglings didn't happen, they would be extinct. I don't know. You can't predict these things, but that's not a hero who smuggled those animals. That's a criminal who smuggled those animals. Define it as you may and judge that person as you may, but it's just the very truth of it is that is what happened. And I don't know, to have some of the people revered in our community seems very strange to me.
Yes, I don't get that. And if you're trying to convince a conservation agency that you're on the level and we hold these people in high regard, that to the conservation agency goes against like literally everything they exist for, that is kind of a bad, it's really hard to have credibility in that particular situation.
Yeah.
So that's the end of the question.
No, for sure. Well, this is something that I was going to mention, but Timothy asked us as well. So what's your definition of policing the reptile community? Like from a practical standpoint, what should we all be doing to hold ourselves accountable?
I think it's a thin line. So like when we see people doing questionable stuff, it's your, as a herpetoculturalist, I think it's you have to figure out whether you're going to work with that person or not in the future.
Yeah.
You don't have to get overly dramatic and flame them in social media or start the gossip mill, but you just have to kind of think about your response, and then you might want to talk within your community. And when I mean your community, not like the ball python breeding community, but like your regional community or your group of friends or your closest herpetoculturalist buddies, and be like, yo, this person's like not on the level.
Yeah.
Jason Hood did that with me. Like, I was like, I don't know what, like way back when I was building that collection and realized I was in above my head, I reached out to Jason and was like, hey, I think you know something about spilotes, which he obviously does.
Yeah.
I was like, what are your thoughts on this? And he was like, yeah, get rid of those animals. I was like, all right, done. Like, you know what I mean? And I kind of admired Jason for not beating around the bush. And he didn't say, like, this person's a scumbag and he's a piece of shit. And that wasn't it. It was just like, you shouldn't work with him. He does shady stuff.
Yeah.
I have, Jason has isolated him from his repertoire. So that's one thing we can do. Another thing is, I think that in certain scenarios, while we did just get done saying, don't juggle ball pythons, I think you can also do a lot of policing in a weird way by leading by example.
Yeah.
Sure. I think that the way you present yourself and you present herpetoculture is kind of an indirect policing. In other words, like, this is my standard.
Sure. And
this is a standard that you, the person consuming this material, can live up to. Or you can live up to this guy that's juggling ball pythons, standard. Which is better? And that's a way to do it. And then I think the other thing is you support herpetoculture and the positive sides of herpetoculture with your dollar. So you only, if you really want a snake and you go to your regional reptile show, and there are importers that do amazing jobs with bringing animals in and getting them prepared, there are importers that don't. So you see that cheap mangrove snake that's on the verge of death and you want a dendrophila,
Yeah.
Or you can go onto an electronic marketplace and find a captive bred dendrophila, maybe support the breeder that's busting their ass to produce captive bred US captive bred dendrophila, and maybe save up a couple $100.
Yeah.
Instead of buying the fresh import, which you're then potentially, not that all importers are bad, I'm not saying that, because there are captive breeders that are not the best, but just basically support what you think is amicable on the up herpetoculture. I think that's a way that we police it.
Yeah. I think your point of leading by example is a great one too, that not a lot of people really take quite as seriously as they should. The absence of words sometimes is better than the words themselves.
Yes.
I think especially when it comes to husbandry of animals or your mentality in general about how, your philosophy on things. For instance, one thing that I like to do, it's relatively new, but like making YouTube videos about venomous reptiles where they're just the focus and talking about the snake and showing the snake and not having it crawl on my face and stuff like that. And, they're not getting 1 million views like some of these guys do, but they're getting the reaction I was hoping they'd get. And I feel like something just as simple as that can be enough of, I'm not in these videos, I made a little joke in one, but like, I'm not denouncing free handling, or I'm not, talking down to people. Not that that's not my opinion, but I don't think that accomplishes anything as well. So just having that be the perspective that can be seen, I feel like is the way to kind of oppose what I'm again, when I'm going up against.
Absolutely. To me, the leading by example thing is critical. And I think another thing that we can do, which seems kind of strange, because the idea is like policing, but mentor people. We don't do this enough.
Yeah.
And we now can do this crazy mentoring from afar. Like, there's a couple people that reached out to me. They were like in their early teens. And they were like, hey, Dr. Loafman. And there was a part of me, to be honest with you, that was like, is it weird that I am 40 some odd years old messaging this like, and I was like, no, this isn't creepy because we're keeping it on the level. I was like, you know what I mean? But you got to think about that crap.
12-year-old.
Yeah. But, you know, they got a false water cobra. And there was a part of me that was like, should a 15-year-old have a false water cobra? Well, I found out that they got it with their dad.
Okay.
You know? Yeah. And they wanted to know how to take care of it. And they were asking me questions. And, you know, I can't text for crap. This thumb doesn't move. So I told them right off the bat, like, I'm going to send some really messed up text messages because if I'm not at my keyboard, it's going to come out weird. But, you know, I'll help you. And I started messaging back and forth. And I never viewed that as mentoring. Like, to me, somebody coming into this space and I'm showing them like what I do up at school. But in 2025, you can mentor anybody anywhere. You know what I mean? And that's also a really good way to build your community because back when I started doing podcasts in 2017, when I would talk about false water cobras, you know, I would get a person here, a person there that would message me after, you know, going on from the ground up or THP. And then over time, it was like, Jesus God, every time I opened up my messenger, I got 25 people in here asking me questions and it got a little annoying, but then I realized I'm helping them. They're coming to me for assistance. I'm going to learn a little bit too. And now there's like this giant armada of people out there that when they think false water cobra, they think Zack. It's helped my private side business of moving the animals. And it's leading by example because now I'm able to kind of control the husbandry of these animals, if that makes sense.
100%.
So I think that we need to do that. I will fully admit there are times when I go through the DMs and I'm like, I don't have time for this. Okay. But I literally think I'll just do it tonight. I don't need to message them right now. And then it's oftentimes enjoyable in the end. Like one of the best things, I know you guys have experienced this, is I send the snakes off and I'm like, send me baby pics. You know, when I send a pair to someone, I'm like, when you get your first clutch, I want to see baby. And that's finally, like, that happened for the first time last year for me. And I felt just as stoked as I did when I got my first pair from the animals that I ran. I mean, you know, so I like that. That's a really cool part. So that all falls under the policing, in my opinion. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I mean, if you are the authority on what you're talking about and you're the first person that someone may find, that's their baseline of information. So you're not having to correct, you know, behaviors that were learned improperly. You are laying the groundwork in the first place. That's, you know, that skips a whole step and many mistakes and you know, whatnot that can be completely avoided. So it's super important. So
that's my answer to policing.
Very cool. Alex, do you have anything else to add or ask?
Honestly, I think that's just a positive way to wrap up this discussion. Honestly, like that makes me feel better. I know, Zack, seriously, thank you for being real, being honest. Like this is one for the books for sure. There's a reason why, you know, you're the head of what you do and why you're considered by many of you the best of what you do. Honestly, thank you for taking your time to talk with Steven and I tonight. I was really looking forward to this. And I think a lot of the listeners who are tuned in live or that will be re-listening on all the audio platforms, this is an episode that'll have information they can't get anywhere else. So seriously, thank you.
Maybe other than your podcast.
Other than CCR, go check out Colubrid and Colubroid Radio with Zack and Clint.
Well, thank you all for having me.
Absolutely.
It's fun to go on the other side of the microphone and have people ask you questions instead of you having to carry and push the conversation and worry about, like, is this engaging enough? Or our listeners going to like it? So this was a great 2 hours and 20 minutes, man.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Very glad to hear. Well, for anyone who wants to keep up with what you're doing, listen to the podcast, even check out the university, where can everyone find everything you have going on?
Sure. So if you want to, you know, contact me, the best way to do that is through Facebook. It's just Zac Loughman, or Instagram, Dr. Crawdad there. So reach out to me. I'd be happy to message you. If you're interested in a false water cobra, I always have false water cobras. In fact, I think I have a girl that's probably laying right now.
Oh, wow.
Up at the university. Awesome. I hope she's laying because she was doing all the things before that. And then the other thing is, of course, Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. So check out our podcast. I was talking to Clint, and I heard he's coming on shortly after me.
Yeah.
So if you are in any way, shape, or form, if you just like snakes, give CCR a listen. Clint and I do the best that we can to try to make it interesting and engaging. The episode that dropped earlier today it was just him and me, and we asked each other questions, and I just love when Clint and I are spitballing at each other, because at this point we're basically brothers, so we can kind of jab at each other and no one gets upset, and it's just a great time. So you can find Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. We're on YouTube now, and then Spotify, Apple Radio, Castbox, any podcast platform, we should be on there at this point in time. And then check out Morelia Python Radio Network, because that's where our podcast is hosted. So, and then I guess, finally, West Liberty University, if you look up biology or zoo science, that's the place to go. And if you're young and you're listening to this, full disclosure, you know why I go on podcast now. So consider coming to West Lib, because you can get a job doing what we all love, and you can come out the other end with a degree. So there you go.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Zach, for your time tonight. This was an awesome conversation. I know Alex and I both got an immense amount out of it, and I know everyone who listened did as well.
Well, thank you.
A lot of notes were taken.
Okay, very cool.
Well, I'll throw you backstage real quick while we close this out. But once again, thank you so much for your time. This was a great conversation. Yep. All righty. All right, Alex. What a podcast. What a podcast.
Quite the podcast. Yeah, there's no words to describe just, I don't know, how much of a wealth of knowledge, experience, and I guess just insight Zack has. It takes a special kind of person, in my opinion, to be in the unique position he is. And definitely somebody that, I really appreciate listening to CCR and just, seeing the work he's doing. And, for me, when I was really little, it started out watching Steve Irwin on TV. I remember my dad said, when I was 5 years old, I wanted to be like Ron Whitaker, and I was going to study king cobras and move to India. My mom hated that idea. But, it for me, even that foundation was, the research aspect. And then, the gateway drug was me getting my first pet reptiles. And now I'm curating a collection and growing my own personal collection of lizards. But I just think, what Zack is doing for lack of a better term, knowledge hungry young people that are trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives in the realm of animals, and in this case, reptiles.
No, it's huge.
It's immense. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, for everyone who wants to keep up with what you're doing, where can you be found on the old internet?
Facebook, Instagram, and Fauna Classifieds. And technically, I did make a Morph Market page now, but just look up alexsagamids, and you'll see all my water dragon and sailfin dragon content on there, and YouTube as well. I'm trying to make little breeding update videos just so people can follow along with the hatching season as it approaches.
Cool. All righty. Well, for me, Instagram, Scrub Shepherd, Stephen Kush, Facebook, at Kush Reptile on YouTube, and Morph Market as well. And here every Wednesday night. And as Zach alluded to earlier, we will be back here, Alex and I, next Wednesday with Clint Bartley, the other half of CCR. With all that said, thank you guys for tuning in tonight. Catch you all back here next week for a new episode.